to the Skills Class mini lecture. I'm Dr. Allen, and today we are going to talk about your triad experience. Today's agenda, we're first going to go over the informed consent process in counseling and what that might look like for you as a counselor in your triad. We're going to talk about what it's like to provide feedback, how to give good feedback, and receive feedback gracefully. And we're going to talk about what your responsibilities are in each of the 3 triad roles. So we're starting with informed consent. This is a mutual agreement of services that make clients aware of their rights and responsibilities in the counseling relationship. Most of the time, clients will complete a form before they even see you, going over all of the components of the informed consent, but it's always good practice to discuss it, at least the basics, during your first session with them. And honestly, in the very first minutes before you jump into anything deeper. One important concept and part of the informed consent that I highly recommend going over every single time is the limits of confidentiality. This is the point at which you might have to share what you talk about with your client with someone else, usually the authorities or a family member. Otherwise, you are essentially prohibited from discussing your client outside of the counseling room. So moments that you will have to break confidentiality, or might, is if the person is at risk to themselves or others. This means that they are at risk of killing themselves or killing or physically harming other people. You are also mandated. Going back to that one, sometimes it varies based on the state you are in, so know your state laws. I know in Florida, that's part of the law. Most laws also require that if you suspect child, elder, or abuse of a vulnerable adult, like someone with special needs, then you also have to contact either Child Protective Services or the Department of Children and Family. And then finally, you might have to talk if a legal court processes force you. That's if a judge signs the subpoena, not necessarily just a lawyer. It has to come from a judge. So as you can tell, just even as I'm talking about it, there's a lot of thought that has to go into it before you choose to break confidentiality with a client, because HIPAA is one of the highest kind of laws that we have to follow as counselors. Now, this is an example of informed consent, one that you will use as your guide for doing your triad process. So you might say that you'll start with your training. So where you're at, that means you will say something like, I am a master's level counselor in training. And then you want to say what they can expect. You might say something like, we will meet for about 15 to 20 minutes each week for the next 4 months as part of my training. I will be recording our time together so I can receive supervision on my skills and provide you the best care possible. And then finally, those limits of confidentiality. And you want to know these off the back of your hand. You might say something like, for the most part, what you say in here stays here. There may be times when you need to involve other people, since safety is something I take very seriously. Those times include if you were to share thoughts of hurting yourself or someone else, abuse of a child, elderly person, or dependent adult, if you sign a release of information for me to talk or work together with another helper, or if I receive a court order. Honestly, I recommend that you practice this often, especially before you see your first client. And I recommend pausing right now, pause this video, take a moment to read over this and to try to say it out loud. It gets easier each time. So some other things to think about when it comes to informed consent. The first meeting is often different from your time together. You're going to have to be going over paperwork. There's likely several questions that your practice will require you to answer and fill out. And regardless, this is the first meeting and it will influence if your client even returns to your office. So it's really important to start off on the right foot. And you can do that by considering your tone, especially when talking about limits of confidentiality. You don't want to be punitive or make it sound like a punishment. I usually try to avoid saying the term break confidentiality because that can kind of automatically put a client on defense. That's why I word it very carefully in the last slide. Importantly, don't make assumptions about your client or skip any steps. Just because your client is also a counselor doesn't mean that you should skip the limits of confidentiality. Don't assume that they know it. Go over it anyway. Don't skip anything about risk assessment or even asking questions in that intake based on how a person appears. Because they don't look depressed doesn't mean that they don't have suicidal ideation. So just never skip steps. Don't assume. Always explore. And then finally, you want to allow time for the client to convey their understanding and ask any questions. I like to pause after each big chunk just to see if they have any questions about it. So as far as this class, kind of your own informed consent for us moving forward, because you will be meeting regularly with your peers and talking about things going on in your own life and in your heart. And that can be hard to do, especially with what we're starting off as strangers. So what I want you to know is that personal information shared in this class belongs in this class. Please practice confidentiality. If whatever your client or classmates share, please try to keep that within the confines of your triad. Of course, there are limitations to that, just like the limitations of confidentiality. If you're worried about their safety or the safety of others, that's when you'll reach out and talk to me. As the client, you have freedom to share as much or as little as you wish. You don't have to dive deep. You don't have to share as much specific details. Definitely don't go into trauma, but that's your choice. And others in the class have the freedom to give you feedback either way. So they might notice that you're not sharing, and they might share that with you. And that's okay. You want to decide for yourself what you are comfortable disclosing. We're not going to force you to say anything. And then finally, attend to the person sharing. Listen with your ears and eyes while paying attention to what you are feeling. So we urge you to be a reflective counselor, a reflective practitioner through this whole process, just as we ask that of your peers. Now, you're going to be giving and getting feedback on a regular basis. So it's important to know how to give it well. It really is part of an art in its own way. A common visual for giving feedback is the sandwich technique. And honestly, I use this all the time with my clients, especially when we're doing assertiveness training. So it's a great skill just to know regardless. So when you sandwich your feedback, what you're going to do is first you're going to share what you notice that the counselor did well. Right? You might point out their body language. You might point out their use of minimal encouragers, their presence, their empathy. No matter what, there's something that they did well. So try to point that out first. Then you want to come up with and share that constructive feedback. Avoid why questions like, why did you do this? Or why didn't you do that? That's automatically saying that you should have done something different, but you don't know for sure. But you want to say something that you noticed. You might use an I statement like, I noticed when the client said something really emotional and started tearing up, you looked away. And just leave it there and just share that you've noticed that. Or even provide suggestions. When you use minimal encouragers so frequently, it sounds like you're interrupting your client. Maybe try not to use them as much or to nod more instead. And then you want to end with another strength that you noticed, or even kind of wrap up everything. You have really great empathy with a client. You're clearly building a really strong rapport. So this is something that I personally have to work on. Recognize that feedback is a process, that growth is a process. It happens over time. Not everything needs to be pointed out right away. You might notice 5, 6 things that a counselor could have done better. You don't need to share all of those things. Pick the top 2 and then save the other things for later if you notice. Once you start giving too much feedback, the person can become very overwhelmed with it, because at that point, like, what do you focus on next time, right? So don't feel like you have to share everything under the sun. When you give feedback, you want to refer to a behavior that the receiver can do something about, right? This is not about their own characteristics, their own looks, right? It's something that they can do next time to make a change. You want to describe the behavior very specifically. You might say something like, when you said this, I noticed that. Like when you said or when you shared about your own personal experience with this, I noticed the client seemed to check out. They looked away, they just seemed to disengage. And use those I statements. Take responsibility for your own thoughts, feelings, and reactions. You want to avoid things like, you always do this, or you never do that, or you ask too many questions, right? So with the I statements, you're going to keep it from your point of view. It might be something like, from my point of view, it seems like you prefer to use questions over reflections. Other examples of I statement stems are, I feel blank when you blank. I think ... It was my understanding that we weren't supposed to ask questions yet. And I noticed you asked several. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Or what is it like to use a paraphrase with this client? And I appreciate you listening to this feedback. I know it's not easy to hear. On the reverse side, receiving feedback is also its own art and can be really challenging. It is never fun to receive criticism about how you present as a counselor. I'd like to say it gets easier. It kind of does, but it doesn't. It touches on a place because it's such a personal endeavor that it's hard not to see it as a personal attack. But it's important to know, especially in this class, is that it is not. The feedback that you receive either from myself or from your classmates comes from a genuine place to make you an even better counselor. So it's really important that you remain open to hearing feedback, that you are responsive, engaged, and actively listening. Don't use those moments to shut down or to disassociate or to kind of go elsewhere in your mind or start even reviewing the session that you just had. Stay present in that moment and really listen to the feedback. You also want to be accepting and respectful about it. Don't assume that you're always right. Don't assume that you know everything already. And I don't say that facetiously, but sometimes our pride gets in the way of like, well, I know I'm doing it right. Or their feedback's wrong, right? Don't assume that. Accept that maybe that what they're saying might be accurate. And if you don't know for sure, come talk to me about it. We can explore that even more. And you want to stay thoughtful, interested, and sincere through that process. Again, this is all coming from a good place and with a genuine goal to help you get better. We all need it, whether we're beginning counselors, registered interns, or even licensed. We need that feedback from others to make sure that we are getting better and providing our clients the best care. All right, finally, what is it that you're actually going to be doing within each role? So in this class, you are going to serve as 3 different roles, each with different rights and responsibilities. The big one that we've been talking about is you're going to be a counselor. Yes, you are going to be sitting with a quote unquote client, and you're going to be seeing that person consistently throughout the semester. You do have the right as the counselor to receive respectful feedback, right? From your client and from the observer and from myself. Right? That is your right. It should not be contemptuous criticism about what you're doing. We have a lot of responsibilities in this role. One, your responsibility is to use the counseling skills discussed in class. I know you have your own abilities and natural tendencies as a helper. We're not trying to strip your personality from you, but I really want to see that effort of you using these counseling skills because those are what's proven to help facilitate therapeutic change. I want you to practice unconditional positive regard. You're not going to agree with everything your client says. You're not them. And so unconditional positive regard means that you are respecting them for for what they do, for who they are. You might not be condoning behavior or beliefs or lifestyles, but you have respect for them. You need to reflect on your sessions. That's why you're recording every one so that you can go back and rewatch. But I also want you to think about that. What could you have done better? And also importantly, what have you done well? Often beginning counselors don't focus on that part enough. And then I want you to accurately assess your areas of growth, weakness, and biases. I mentioned those too, but also the biases. Start noticing where you differ from your client in thought process. If they say something and if you have a negative reaction to it personally, right? Start becoming aware of that, because if you're not, and if you're not mindful of it, it will come out in session. And most importantly, keep confidentiality. As a client, you have a right to confidentiality. What you say should not be shared throughout the class. You have the right to only discuss what you feel comfortable discussing and to provide respectful feedback about your experience as a client. Your responsibilities is to discuss topics, issues that are low level and to your comfort level. So be mindful of what you share. I don't want you digging deep into your past trauma or even current experiences that are above and beyond what your counselor can handle. They are new. They are just seeing a client for the first time. So please don't dump too heavy of a topic on them, because one, they might not be able to handle it, and two, you won't get the support that you deserve in that moment. So save that for your own personal counseling and only go to that comfort level of kind of minor frustrations in this class. You can request a topic change if you're uncomfortable. If it's going to a place that's too deep for you, say, I want to stop here. Let's talk about something else instead. And then try to be a cooperative client. So don't be actively resistant to your counselor, spending the entire session being silent, answering everything in one-word answers. Your counselor's trying, they're learning. If for some reason you have some sort of transference towards your counselor that is inhibiting you to feel comfortable, use that time to come talk with me and I'll provide some supervision. Finally, your last role is that of an observer. So you will be sitting in and watching a client and a counselor doing their sessions within your triad. As far as your rights, your right is to receive respectful feedback about how you give feedback, because, like I said, that is also a skill. As far as your responsibilities, it's to take notes about interventions and skills used by the counselor using the SOF form. Do not interject into a session. It doesn't matter what's said, how bad it goes, leave it be. Or how much you connect, leave it be. You are to be a fly on the wall. Of course, that's if there's something going on where there's danger involved, right? There's always that caveat. But otherwise, you're a fly on the wall until that session is over. You are to observe the client's reaction. So how do they respond to the counselor? And then be kind, graceful, and compassionate when giving feedback to the counselor. As you know, being it's hard to get that kind of feedback. So give it as you would want to receive it. Keep confidentiality, again, number one goal here, and also keep time. We're still all learning that internal clock when it comes to counseling. So do your counselor a favor in your triad and have a time limit and a reminder. All right. Well, that's the end of this mini lecture. If you have any questions at all about this, please email me at lkallen@scu.edu, and I look forward to hearing from you. Good luck, counselors.